yeah, there's nothing to sort of hype you up and prime you for talking to a group full of people than just that big heaping dose of imposter syndrome. So thanks, guys. Yeah, I've been years since I've released a game. So yeah, ignore the nonsense intro. This is me. I teach game design. I used to be a game designer, kind of a game designer. I'm a game designer in my heart. Sometimes it's like being, a creative director for like 20 projects that are all simultaneously going off the rails. And I'm a struggling academic. I'm a really, really terrible academic. It turns out being a teacher is a lot more complicated than you might think at first. For one thing, you're supposed to disseminate knowledge and write papers and do PhDs and research studies and all that kind of nonsense. And I didn't know that when I got into this job. I'm starting to get the hang of that now. The other thing is that you have to really understand stuff. When you start teaching, it's easy. It's actually kind of easy. It's like you just kind of explain stuff to people and you help people see what you see. And all right, that's dead easy. And then you start trying to be good at it. And then you realize actually you have to achieve this kind of deeper meaning level of everything. You break things down and you come up with models and structures for things. So all this sort of pretentious nonsense that you hear us talk about, you think, we never use that on the shop floor. Yeah, no, of course you don't use it on the shop floor because you just know that stuff. All of it is ways that we're trying to help students learn things and understand things. And you come into a lot of interesting stuff as you do that. So, I talk for a living, and I met Joe, and Joe's like, he needs people to talk. So he's like, when are you going to come do a talk? And I thought, I could talk about production, I could talk about game design, level design, and I was like, I'd mostly be preaching to the choir. So I thought, let's do something interesting. Let's talk about interesting stuff I don't get to talk about with my students. And that's how I ended up with this topic. It's not brilliantly researched. This is not going to be an academic presentation. This is a sort of jumbled collection of thoughts of something that's been on my mind for a while. But hopefully it's enough to sort of start a conversation and be interesting. I do have to start with some basics. In order to talk about game design, we kind of have to define game design. It's one of these things you have to do every single time because people have different definitions of things. This should hopefully not be new to most people, but just in case you're not used to this, design from an academic perspective, the way I would always talk about it, design is a purposeful act of creativity. So it's about having ideas is a big part of design, but it's about having ideas towards a purpose, so trying to achieve something. So it's a goal-oriented behavior. We are trying to get somewhere with ideas. We don't, and this is a moment where I might duck under the podium just in case, we don't just throw mechanics at the wall and see what sticks. That's how some people operate. I don't know. That's not how I would define design. But that's kind of experimentation, which is part of design. This is where things get thorny. Games are structures of rules-based interactivity intended to produce playful experiences. Technically, yes, they are. Our goal is to create a playful experience for people. Just go with me, because I know where you're going to go. And this brings us to this definition of game design. So the application of purposeful creativity to create rules-based interactivity with the goal of producing a playful response. So it's not just sort of, hey, let's come up with ideas. It's we are trying purposefully to create a rules-based structure for people to interact with, and our goal is to create for those people to have a playful response. Now this is where academia runs into some issues. Gone Home and Firewatch, two of my favorite video games. Firewatch is just one of the best media experiences I have had my entire life. Absolutely adored that product. From an academic perspective, not overly playful. Very quite. We sort of went in one direction. We weren't exploring. We weren't trying weird things. So ordinarily, and I always caveat this by saying this actually doesn't matter. outside of academic discussions. It doesn't matter. These things are awesome. We need more of them. Please make them. Please be weird. Please break rules of playfulness. Please do that. But it changes some of our definitions. So for the purpose of this talk, I'm going to use this kind of definition because what we're actually trying to do when we make these rules-based structures is generate an effective emotional or behavioral response in a player. A while ago, I was here watching somebody do a talk, and they were like, I was trying to do something new with my game. I was trying to make people feel something, and I was just in the back there. I was like, motherfucker, that's our whole job. Like, that's everything in game design. If your game isn't making people feel something, what's it doing? Okay. No, I'm going to do it. Next, this next bit, I was like, do I skip this? No, I'm going to try. I'm going to do this. So we're going to do an experiment. I'm sorry. It's going to be awkward. It's going to be weird. There's an interactive portion here. But it's a demonstration of something. So I'm going to ask you to all please stand up if you can. And I know you're sighing, and I know you're like, ah. I'll explain that in a minute. It does say I'll sit down. I've got a stool here, so I'll do that. Okay. So I need you all to relax. Just create a calm atmosphere. I want you to read this next slide very carefully. There's a lot of text on it, actually, so I will read it through for you. So I'm going to say is I notice there's a typo in here in the you agree to, but I agree to hold a responsibility to inform and educate you to the best of my ability. I agree you're going to trust that you're going to listen to me. I'll trust that you're listening to me. And I agree to answer any questions that you have as best I can. And that's tonight. And from here on out, you grab me in the street. You're like, that guy that did that talk, hey, I've got a question for you. My guarantee, I decide right now I will answer those questions. And you're going to agree to listen to me with an open and curious mind, to trust that I'm trying to educate and inform you, that's the typo is, to the best of my ability, and to remember this in future and reach out if you ever have any questions about it. Okay. So what I'm going to ask you to do is, when you're prepared to accept this, please sit down. Okay. Good. Okay, I'm going to stand up. There we go. So what did we just do? Everybody tell me what we just said? We all agreed to stuff? Social contract, yes, somebody knows where this is going. Excellent. Yes, we just agreed to a social contract that adjusted the terms of our relationship. That is a huge, huge thing. Like I don't know you people, and I've just made an agreement and built a trust bond with you. That's, wow. We also stood up and sat down again, which is a really fucking stupid thing. I just wasted your time. That was pointless. That was stupid. And this is an exercise I do with my students to just kind of point out that things have meaning based on context. And we can change the meaning of things if we change the context in which we do them. And if we're really tricky, we can design a scenario where we can change that. The reason I ask you to stand up is because I know you hate it. And you want to sit down. And you don't want to... Like, if I'm doing this with first-year students, obviously they're going to rebel. Some of them are going to go, I'm just not going to sit down. Yeah, let's see how long you can stand for. Especially when everyone else has sat down. It's really awkward. I engineered the scenario to make this happen. There's layers of meaning to everything. Video games are stupid, dumb, pointless activities. You are tapping buttons, wiggling joysticks. You are doing nothing. You are wasting your time. You are also going to new places, exploring deep feelings. It's the most mind-blowing experience ever. They have changed people's lives. So that's what we do. Game designers alter the meaning of activities by altering their context. And this is a huge, huge power that we wield. It's actually a little bit scary when you think about it. The simplest way we do this is by giving people goals. Goals can encourage people to do anything. Sir Edmund Hillary climbed Everest, and when asked why, because it is there. It is there to climb. So obviously cribbed from Ronald Reagan's speech about why we went to the moon, for the same reason. We went to the moon because we could, because America wants to beat Russia there. But people are goal-oriented beasts. That's the main point here. The targets that we're trying to hit, the goals we're trying to hit, only need to make sense to us. They don't need to make sense to anybody else. And so game designers, by giving people goals, we inspire that action, and through that action we create the change in them, we create response in them. I probably don't need to lecture you guys on the whole magic circle theory, but games do allow us to kind of create this space where we can do things we wouldn't normally do. I certainly hope none of you would try and knock people out on a regular basis. Generally it's socially unacceptable to strike somebody in the head so hard that their brain actually compresses against the other side of their skull and stops working for a short period of time. That is the goal. That's literally the goal of boxing. Poker, essentially lying, cheating, stealing from your friends. And we do this for fun. And it becomes fun because we change the context, we change the meaning of everything. And I have a point there, don't worry. This is building to something. And sometimes, there's a whole bunch of different scenarios for game design that I'm going to go into with this. But sometimes just that submission to a rule-based structure is fun in itself. Just letting a rule-based structure drive for a little bit of time. Repetitive, compulsive performance of rote action frees the brain from strenuous executive actions. I have ADHD as well. I'm fighting really hard to stay on topic right now. But I really know this. Like, my brain is just going constantly. People talk about, I love the, like, I also hate ADHD being a superpower. It's like ADHD is a superpower, like your car is really fast if you just put a brick on the accelerator. My brain just goes all the time. I play some repetitive frickin' games. And it's just because it just eats up cycles in my brain. My brain can't turn off normally. So this is great for me. I just give it something to do. And the rest of my brain goes like, oh, hey, Alan, you haven't eaten for 12 hours. Like, but yeah, submission to rules-based structure. And it creates repetitive, compulsive performances, freeing the brain from strenuous actions. Does that sound familiar to anyone else from anything else outside of games? Repetitive actions designed to help us achieve a certain difference. There's a couple of heads nodding. Yeah, I see you know where this is going. Meditative practices. As soon as I say meditation, you start to think maybe chiming gongs or whatever. Quite often, that's actually, I mean, it's not entirely accurate to how it is, but quite often there's repetitive noises, there's repetitive phrases, there's things that are repeated over and over. And I mean, this isn't the slide where I talk about this, so hopefully I'm not going to tell you the same story twice. I was raised Protestant, kind of. Well, no, I was raised agnostic, which in Scotland basically means you went to a Protestant school and nobody told you that you were Protestant. And I used to listen to prayer quite often, and I didn't get it when I was a kid. Until the first time I was really anxious and I listened to prayer, and actually it made me feel better. I didn't really believe in what they were saying, but the repetitive words over and over again just helped me relax, helped my brain start to process some of what I was going through, which was basically grieving at the time. And so we get to this idea that ritual is about performing these pointless acts over and over again. Like all of this, you have to think, like, religion didn't just pop up out of nowhere. Religion is a designed action that was designed by something centuries ago, millennia ago maybe. But a ritual is basically an otherwise pointless action that is elevated through context. Rituals are stupid. They're just stupid. All you do is follow instructions, repeat words. But rituals are amazing. They bring us hope. They bring us comfort. To this day, I have no idea why in certain parts of the church we steeple our fingers and do this. I don't know why people in certain religions face a certain way when they pray, or pray at a certain time of day. But it brings us help to have structure in our lives, to have these kind of things. And so we start to see this. Game designers alter the meaning of activities by altering the context. Ritual designers alter the meaning by altering context. Now, quite easy to poke a hole in this and say, well, rituals are about following and going in one direction. Games are about having choice. Okay, fair enough. Games are a series of interesting choices. Always a really important thing. So, surely that makes games different. Works for games of rote submission, just giving up to the thing. Doesn't really work for choices. Well, choice is a really interesting thing to look at in video games. I wish, this is an example of me being a terrible academic, I wish I could remember what episode of Idle Thumbs this was from. But there was an episode of Idle Thumbs, if you've not listened to it, it was a podcast years ago, a bunch of guys from the industry, really, really good. It's basically them just like yakking about games for like an hour or two. But Sean Vanneman of Telltale Games popped in every now and again. And at one point, he was skewered on the criticism that Telltale Games were getting at the time, which they used to have all these branching endings for all their games. They used to go in all different directions. And after the first couple of episodes of Walking Dead, they started to do fewer and fewer endings. And some players were like, oh, my choices don't really matter anymore. And he gave this really great response, which was that through the first few Walking Dead games, the metrics they were looking at, the reviews they were getting, watching people play the game, they realized that actually, when people are playing a game like this, they're making choices. A lot of them, they're actually role-playing. They're projecting an idea of a character into what they're doing. They're not exploring different branching pathways because it's quite linear. And actually, when they go back and replay them, they tend to make the same choices because they're role-playing this character they want to role-play. So actually, there's no need for them to be branching. And it's a huge, for the devs in the room probably don't need to know this, but yeah, it's a huge overhead, obviously. Like making why make two endings when we can make one? The power of the choice was actually asking the question in the first place. That was the powerful thing. Anyone play Kentucky Route Zero? Yeah? Awesome game, awesome. Kentucky Route Zero is really good for this. It will give you a scene. It's a game of pure vibe. I don't know if there's any David Lynch fans in the house. Yeah. Kentucky Route Zero is basically like a point-and-click adventure made by if David Lynch made point-and-click adventures. But it's made on pure vibe. Like, it doesn't make sense as a story. It doesn't really have a proper narrative. But it gives you a scene, and then it'll do something like gate progress until you talk to your dog about the scene. And the dog's not going to talk back. It's not going to ask you questions. It's just going to have to explain what just happened. And by only giving you 4 choices in trying to summarize what just happened, it makes you stop and think about what just happened. So the power is actually in the asking, not in the response that you get out of it. The true power of games is their capacity to facilitate self-reflection and self-exploration, even really, really silly games. And the return on investment for production of content is super low in that sense. So it's all about asking meaningful questions. And this brings us back to something that you might find in religion. So if you've ever heard the phrase, like, what's the sound of one hand clapping? This is another thing that I thought these questions are stupid. This is a stupid area of philosophy, until I found out that actually they're supposed to be stupid. They're supposed to be nonsensical. They're supposed to be kind of humorous. Like, there's actually a lot of humor to a lot of these ancient proverbs and things. But they're the same kind of thing. They're there not to find an answer, but to make us think, and maybe make us laugh, maybe make us smile, maybe just go, that's a stupid question. But, you know, by laughing at it, you've thought about it, you know? And I really, really wish I could have found really great spiritual leaders to quote rather than Muhammad Ali, but this summed it up perfectly. Spirituality is recognizing the divine light that's within us all. The search for a lot of times when you look at these things, what people are looking for in religion is not, you know, somebody external to give them a solution. It's how you find the solutions inside you. And so that's pretty much the same. So again, we're back to this idea. They're devising a structure. They're devising rule-based situations, giving you questions, giving you choices, not to just give you something to explore, but to actually give you something to think about, make you reflect. Which you might say, well, okay, so that's games of rote submission, games of choice. Okay, fair enough. But what about luck? What about luck? What about randomness? How does that work? What is the spiritual meaning in a game of chance? What divinity can we draw from playing solitaire? Is there a spirituality to the idea of just winning and losing by itself? You know, just once I want to put a quote from this up and say, I really like this guy. Mark Manson's a bit funny. But The Subtle Art of Not Giving a Fuck is a wonderful book. It's a bit light, it's a bit poppy, but it helped me out when I was in a very bad place. And he leans on a lot of old theologies when he talks about this. Dissatisfaction and unease are inherent parts of human nature and necessary components to creating consistent happiness. The way he kind of summarizes this is that if you spend your whole life trying to live without suffering, you're just going to get frustrated, you're just going to get annoyed, you're just going to find suffering. Actually, the best way he recommends to deal with this is to pick the suffering that you enjoy fighting against and learn to live with it. Learn to say, oh, this is the fight I want to fight. Again, someone whose work I'm not a huge fan of, but he did write a few good points about failure here, Jesper Juul. Games are philosophies on the meaning of failure. Games allow us to fail in a safe space. Okay. The academic theory is that games are separate from reality, and therefore we can do what we want in a game. Obviously, we know from this that's not entirely true, because you are still present in the game, and you are still you when you exit and enter and exit the game. So something carries through. If you want to go back even further, Roger Calwa, Man Playing Games, he goes really deep into some really great stuff about games, but he is oddly bleak and nihilistic in doing so. And he talks about the importance of why we love games of chance, because it encourages the lowly to be more tolerant of a mediocre status that they have no practical means of ever improving. That's a really great quote to flash on the screen after speaking to my graduates who haven't found jobs yet. You'll find it eventually, don't worry, your mediocre status can improve. But if not, just play a game of chance. Apparently it'll make you feel better. But yeah, Alcoholics Anonymous, if any of us have, if you're all lucky enough to never have discovered this, they believe in giving over to a higher power. It's one of the main things about healing yourself, is accepting that there are things outside of the world that are outside of your control, things that influence you, and you just can't avoid it. And that's where that's where games of chance can become an exploration of something deeper. So all of this is basically to say that game design works on the same principles as ritualism. So whenever we teach the history of games and game design, we always talk about the Mesoamerican ball game, and if you really do your research, it's like Egyptian set and that Viking game, I can't remember the name of it. But really, actually, I would say the history of game design is the history of spirituality and ritualism. Like the ancients who created these rules-based structures for people to interact with the goal of trying to help them achieve enlightenment or feel better about things or deal with grief and loss, and whatever. So in game design, we wield this great power. It's silly, it's fun, and I'm not saying that we should stop being... The absolute last thing that you should do as game designers is stop being silly and stop having fun. There's almost something gone wrong when we start making all our games be really grim and sad all the time. But at the same time, we are creating a path to self-reflection. We are creating a path to exploration, and from there, enlightenment. Meaning is a hell of a lot more than thematics. If you start thinking about what is the meaning of these things. I was showing Res earlier and talking about it as a meditative exercise. It actually was part of the marketing for Res. They talked about it being quite meditative. I work a lot with students to try and get them to understand, well, just think for a moment. But after we've got through, just think for a moment, please. The big thing is always, what is it that you're making? What is this game about? And every time I ask that, I get, well, you're this character from the 18th century, and you're fighting this monster. It's like, no, what is this game about? Why are you making it? Why are you here today? Like, what's the motivation behind all of this? I really wish I had a tool set to fix this. I really do. And maybe, my boss is still on my back to get my PhD application in, so maybe this is the topic, maybe not. I don't know. The best thing I can do so far is leave you with a few points. Every choice in your game should really have a reason to exist. Every mechanic in your game should have a reason to exist. I hope I don't have to tell all of you that. But you should have a reason behind things. Sometimes the purpose of choice is to simply pose a question. I'm amazed how many people have not figured out that thing that Sean Bannerman was talking about. I'm amazed how many people I meet who are making interactive narratives. And it's like, well, why are you making this as an interactive narrative? It's like, so I can have 12 different endings. Like, do people care about 11 of those endings? So think about, when you're thinking about posing a question to people, think about the action the person is going to take. And in a physical game, it's really simple. It's like, well, do you press the button now or do you press the button 2 seconds from now? But in a narrative structure, you're giving them something to think about. What's important is what they're thinking about, not what they're actually going to choose. I don't know if this will actually work or if it will actually help anyone, but you can always look at the way you apply randomness as a reflection of life. It's a very, very complicated way of saying something which I have a whole lecture that I teach to students on, which is basically don't apply randomness in a way that's depressing and unfair and annoying. But in a positive sense, it can be an exploration, a comfortable exploration of failure. That's an incredibly powerful thing to bring to people. Consider the ways in which your game can be interpreted. This goes for both ends of the sort of highbrow, lowbrow spectrum. I've met plenty of people who are making, super violent action games. And then I'm like, what do you think about like people that are going to play this and live out their dark fantasies of doing these awful things in real life? And they're like, well, that's not really mine. So I'm like, it's still kind of your responsibility, bud. At the same time, I've met people at the highbrow end who are like, well, you see, my game is a meditation on the experience of life and death. And they're like, no, you're making a bullet hell shooter that has some fancy graphics. Like, that's, But you have to consider that people will interpret your game both sides. And you're kind of responsible for that. And have responsibility for your art beyond what you want it to be. Your art is going to outlive you. The number of movies. Citizen Kane was a flop in its commercial lifetime. It wasn't until it was on a shelf somewhere and resurrected it became the movie we all call Citizen Kane. So yeah, think about what your art is going to be, how it's going to affect the media, how it's going to affect the world, where it's going to go. That's pretty much it. Yeah. So there's just food for thought. I will happily answer questions, but I don't really have answers. It's all very meta at this point. It's all a bit up in the air. So if you have any questions or anything to ask? No? Yes?
Sorry. Could you repeat the name of the game that you just said? The one that did not get success until late.
Oh, the movie Citizen Kane. When people talk about things and they say it's like the Citizen Kane of games. Yeah, like Citizen Kane was actually a flop when it first came out.
So based on what you were saying there about Citizen Kane and kind of spirituality, should we stop asking who's going to make the Citizen Kane of games and instead be asking who's going to make the Bible of video games?
Yeah, actually, absolutely, yeah. Arguably, that's Half-Life, I think. It's a religion to some people at this point. And we're never going to get the proper sequel that we wanted. Spent the rest of eternity saying that Gordon Freeman is going to come back someday.